My name is Claudia, and I'm 58 years old. I watched him stand on that stage, smiling as hundreds applauded him for my work. My designs, my reports, my words all stolen and dressed in his name. Everyone thought he was a genius. And I was just another aging employee in the crowd. But what they didn't know was that behind those flashing lights and fake praise, the truth was already bleeding through the screen. And by the time the night was over, the man who stole my career would be standing there, clapping for me. For more than 3 decades, I've dedicated my life to the same corporate walls of Linton and Chase Technologies, a company that once felt like a second home. I started as a data analyst in my 20s, bright-eyed and hopeful, believing that hard work and loyalty would always speak louder than charm or connections. Over the years, I became known as the steady hand, the one who could turn chaos into clarity. My office was the one people drifted into when deadlines closed in or when new hires needed someone to explain what their managers didn't have time for. I was proud of that. It wasn't glory, but it was purpose. The company had changed since I first walked in. Gone were the days when effort alone earned you recognition. Now, everything was about presentations and flair, the loudest voice in the room. Not necessarily the smartest. I tried to adapt, I really did. But somewhere along the line, being reliable turned into being invisible. The young ones with glossy resumes and easy smiles started to climb the ladder faster than those who built it. Still, I stayed. I trained them, helped them shine, even when it meant dimming my own light. That's when Eric came along. He joined our department 2 years ago, mid-30s. Sharp suit, sharper grin. From the beginning, he had this way of talking that made people lean in, as though every word he spoke carried magic. Management adored him instantly. I saw through it, though. Beneath that polished confidence was something else: calculation. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious sense, but he had a quiet hunger to be seen, no matter who had to disappear for that to happen. We were assigned to work together on a major analytics overhaul, a project that would define the department's next fiscal year. I had been conceptualizing the system long before he arrived, building the framework during my evenings at home, refining it piece by piece. It was meant to streamline client reporting, something I was deeply proud of. Eric offered to help polish the final presentation slides. I remember feeling grateful at first. Maybe collaboration was a bridge between generations. I handed him drafts, notes, and data samples, thinking he just wanted to learn. The presentation day arrived sooner than expected. I walked into the conference room with a mix of excitement and nervousness, ready to showcase what I had poured months into. But when the lights dimmed and the screen lit up, I froze. The title slide bore the name Project Elevate, presented by Eric Martin. My name wasn't there, not even in the acknowledgments. He spoke fluently, guiding the executives through the process I had built, the systems I had tested, the conclusions I had drawn. Every chart, every number, every word came from my drafts. And yet, he stood there, taking bows, while I sat at the back like a stranger to my own creation. I remember the taste of coffee turning bitter in my mouth, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out his voice. The others clapped, executives nodding, managers smiling at him with pride. One of them leaned over and whispered, "He's brilliant." I didn't correct them. My throat locked up, my face stiffened into a polite smile. I sat there, watching him steal what I had built piece by piece. After the presentation, he turned to me in the hallway with that same infuriating grin and said, "Couldn't have done it without your support." Claudia, support. That word lodged itself in my chest like glass. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because I knew if I said anything, it would be dismissed as bitterness. Women like me weren't seen as victims in offices like ours. We were labeled as difficult, past our prime, or uncooperative. So, I did what I had done for years. I swallowed my pride and went back to work. The following week, Eric was promoted to senior strategist. The announcement came through email, with a congratulatory note from the director, an exemplary demonstration of innovation and leadership. Innovation, leadership. 2 words that had been used to describe my project, my effort, but not me. I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again until they blurred. My colleagues came by to congratulate him, clapping him on the back as if he'd won an award for curing disease. Not one person looked in my direction, and when the department head passed me, "Bye," she simply said. "You've always been such a team player, Claudia. That's why we value you." That night, I sat in my car long after the parking lot had emptied, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I replayed every moment of the past months, the drafts I'd sent him, the meetings we'd attended, the nights I stayed late while he left early. Shame burned under my skin, but beneath it was something else. Something sharper. It wasn't just about losing credit, it was about being erased. For days, I went through the motions, keeping my head down. The office buzzed with his success. He strutted through hallways like a man who had earned his kingdom. But in his wake, I noticed small details, the way he avoided my eyes during meetings, how he changed the subject whenever my name came up. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he was proud of it. The arrogance of it all only deepened the quiet fire inside me. I started staying late again, but not to work on company projects. No, I began collecting. Notes, emails, saved drafts, every breadcrumb that proved where the ideas had originated. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I couldn't sit still anymore. Revenge wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was more like correction, balance. I had given this company my years, my patience, my silence. Maybe it was time it gave something back. One evening, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the dark window of my office, tired eyes, gray strands of hair catching the light, but there was something new in that face too, resolve. I realized I wasn't broken, I was preparing. That's when I whispered to myself, "You took my spotlight, Eric. One day, you'll have to watch me stand in it again." That thought lingered like a promise. A slow smile curved across my lips as I turned off my computer. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this much: someday soon, I'd make him applaud me. When Eric's promotion was officially announced, the company cafeteria turned into a celebration hall. Balloons, pastries, and cheerful chatter filled the room. People took turns congratulating him, calling him the man of the hour. I stood at the edge of it all, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold, pretending to read something on my phone. The laughter echoed, the clinking of glasses, the corporate applause, all of it played like a cruel symphony meant to remind me that I was invisible. The very project that had consumed my nights, my weekends, and my energy had now become his legacy. I wanted to vanish, but instead, I smiled when he passed by. Because I knew if I didn't, they'd say I was bitter. The following Monday, I decided to speak up. I went to my manager, Karen, a woman I had worked under for more than a decade. She was polished and distant, the kind of leader who prided herself on managing perceptions. I explained everything, from the project drafts to the final presentation, that excluded my name. I even brought printed copies of my early reports, hoping she'd at least hear me out. She listened, or at least pretended to. Her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, she sighed softly and said, "Claudia, you're one of our veterans. You know how these things go. Sometimes it's better to let the younger ones take the lead. You should focus on mentoring, not competing." That sentence stayed with me like a scar. Mentor, not compete. As if after decades of hard work, my only role left was to quietly hand over everything I'd built. I walked out of her office feeling smaller than I'd ever felt before. In the hallway, I saw Eric leaning against the wall, talking to 2 executives, laughing easily. One of them said, "This guy's a game changer." And Eric glanced my way briefly, his smirk barely visible. He knew I'd gone to Karen. He knew nothing would come of it. He had already learned how to play the system. Over the next few weeks, something subtle began to shift in the office. People who used to chat with me during lunch started avoiding eye contact. Conversations quieted when I entered the break room. It wasn't hostility. It was avoidance, that instinct people have when they sense trouble and don't want to be near it. No one wanted to risk being associated with the woman who might make waves. I was no longer part of the team, just an old fixture in the corner. Even those I had mentored avoided me, and that isolation was worse than anger. It was erasure in real time. But isolation has a way of sharpening observation. Once I was quiet enough, I began noticing things I hadn't before. It wasn't just Eric stealing ideas, it was the culture itself. Younger staff would pitch half-formed thoughts, and management would praise them for vision. Meanwhile, experienced employees like me did the groundwork, refining, polishing, but when it came time for credit, it went to the faces that looked the part, not the ones that built the foundation. I realized this wasn't just about Eric or even Karen, it was about a system that valued presentation over integrity. A company that rewarded confidence more than contribution. I started keeping notes. Every meeting, every email, every passing comment. The pattern was clear. Those who spoke the loudest owned the room. I had spent years believing that results spoke for themselves. But now I saw how naive that was. In this place, silence wasn't grace, it was surrender. I had surrendered for too long. There were nights I questioned if I should simply walk away. I had savings, I was nearing 60, and I could have retired quietly, spared myself the heartache. But every time I thought about leaving, I imagined Eric standing where I should have been, shaking hands with directors, smiling for photographs, carrying forward a legacy he didn't earn. That image lit something inside me. I couldn't end my career as a ghost. If they wanted me invisible, I would make sure my absence spoke louder than their applause. One evening, as I stayed late at the office, scrolling through archived files for a new project, I felt the weight of exhaustion press down on me. The fluorescent lights hummed, the building was nearly empty, and my reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. That's when I heard a soft knock on my cubicle wall. It was Naomi, the summer intern. Barely 22, nervous but bright, the kind of young woman who reminded me of myself decades ago. She glanced around before speaking in a low voice. "Miss Dalton," she said. "I saw what happened during the presentation. I was the one who set up the projector that day. Your name was on the original files." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It felt surreal to have someone acknowledge the truth after weeks of silence. She hesitated, then added, "I thought maybe you'd want to know. I kept copies of the drafts, ones with your name." My pulse quickened. Hope, fragile, unfamiliar, flickered inside me. I asked her to email them to me, and she nodded quickly, promising discretion. When she left, I sat there staring at my monitor, realizing I wasn't entirely alone after all. That night, I opened my old folders, tracing through years of data and reports, cross-referencing with what Naomi sent. The timestamps matched perfectly my work, my writing, my code. Everything Eric had claimed as his own was born from those files. As I scrolled through them, something caught my eye. A folder buried deep within the company archives, labeled Legacy Records. It wasn't part of my project, but curiosity pushed me to open it. Inside were early prototypes and documentation, old, forgotten projects by employees who had left. Most were incomplete, but a few looked eerily familiar. The formatting, the structure, it was identical to my system. It was then I realized Eric hadn't just stolen from me. He had a pattern. He'd done it before, borrowing from past employees, rebranding their unfinished work as his innovation. And somehow, he'd gotten away with it every time. My breath caught. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the pieces fit together. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic fraud disguised as success. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than defeat. It wasn't rage, it was focus. A cold, deliberate calm that told me exactly what I needed to do. I closed the folders and powered down my computer, my reflection staring back at me from the black screen. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady when I whispered to the empty room, "You've done this before, Eric, but not again. Not with me." I walked out of that office knowing the tide had turned. I had the truth now, and soon, the company would too. The office after hours was a different world. The fluorescent lights that felt harsh during the fluorescent day became ghostly at night, humming softly above empty cubicles. Most employees had gone home hours ago, the air still holding the faint smell of coffee and toner. I sat there in the glow of my monitor, the only sound being the quiet rhythm of my typing. My fingers moved with a purpose that surprised even me. For years I'd stayed late out of dedication. Now, I stayed late out of defiance. This time, the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt like focus. Naomi had already gone home, but her email from earlier that day had given me direction. Attached were folders of drafts and slides, my work each stamped with creation dates months before Eric's so-called innovation. I opened each file, cross-referencing, renaming, cataloging. It was tedious, meticulous work, but I found comfort in it. Every timestamp, every version, every note in the margins felt like a small victory. The evidence was there. I just had to connect the dots. Hours slipped by unnoticed as I moved deeper into the company's internal servers. I had access privileges from my years of seniority, something Eric probably hadn't considered when he hijacked my project. The company stored backups of every major update, every shared draft, every system log. Most people never bothered to look that deep. I did. And what I found made my chest tighten. Not only were my files untouched and intact, but some had internal tracking tags metadata showing exactly when they were first created and who had uploaded them. My name appeared again and again, long before Eric's. There it was, in black and white, proof that the foundation was mine. The next morning, Naomi returned early, her face bright but nervous. She brought her laptop, and we sat side by side, whispering as if the walls could hear us. "We'll organize everything," she said, pulling up spreadsheets. We created a timeline when the drafts were made, when Eric accessed them, and when he presented them. Each piece fell into place, each file building a story that couldn't be denied. Watching her work, I felt a rare flicker of gratitude. I wasn't alone in this, after all. A week later, during a department briefing, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. The director was congratulating Eric again, this time for being nominated for an industry award. "The Regional Innovator's Honor," she said, smiling proudly. "He'll be representing Linton and Chase next month." I froze in my seat, the sound of her words blurring around me. That award was the highest recognition in our field, something I had quietly dreamed about for years. To hear his name attached to my work in that context, it felt like being robbed twice. When I returned to my desk, I didn't cry or shake. I just sat there, staring at my monitor, letting the news settle into something sharp and deliberate. The anger I felt wasn't wild anymore. It was precise. I realized rage wouldn't win this fight, documentation would. Strategy would. I was done playing by their rules. It was time to learn how to bend them to my favor. That night, as I shut down my computer, my eyes fell on my office chair. It was old, the leather cracked, the cushions slightly worn from years of use. I remembered the day Eric had taken over my project, how he had sat in my chair during that meeting, spinning it casually as he bragged about our progress. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now the image stayed with me. That chair had always represented my place in this company, earned, but overlooked. Maybe it was time I took it back, not just the seat itself, but everything it symbolized. I decided I would make that chair mine again, not through anger, but through undeniable proof. Over the next several days, Naomi and I built a hidden archive. Every document was backed up in multiple places, encrypted drives, personal storage, even a USB hidden in my handbag. She taught me shortcuts, ways to trace internal edits, digital fingerprints that couldn't be erased. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became that Eric's rise wasn't built on brilliance but on theft. He had a pattern of borrowing ideas, rephrasing memos, even renaming others' code. He wasn't innovative, he was clever at hiding it. I began studying the award's nomination process, reading every rule and submission guideline. I discovered something interesting. The award committee required original documentation of development phases for verification, but only if someone raised a formal inquiry. That was the loophole. If I could submit evidence at the right moment, the committee would have to investigate before the ceremony. But filing a complaint now would alert the company and give Eric time to cover his tracks. Timing was everything. So, instead of rushing in with accusations, I drafted a report, a formal, detailed document outlining every piece of evidence. I saved it on my desktop, then on the hidden drive, labeling it simply as, for review. I imagined sending it to the committee, to the board, to everyone who had once ignored me. My fingers hovered over the send button more than once, but I didn't click it. Not yet. There was something more satisfying about waiting, about letting him feel secure before pulling the rug out from under him. Every day after that felt like a quiet game of chess. Eric continued to strut through the halls, boasting about the award, joking about what he'd say in his acceptance speech. The company posted an announcement on the internal site with his smiling picture. I even congratulated him in front of everyone, just to throw him off. The satisfaction in his eyes made my skin crawl, but beneath that false politeness, I was calm. Let him think he'd won. Let him bask in borrowed light a little longer. Late one Friday evening, after finishing another round of file sorting, I received an email that stopped me cold. It came from an anonymous sender, no subject line, no. Their signature, just a single sentence. You're not the first one he's done this to. I can help you prove it. My hands trembled as I reread it. Attached was a single document, an internal memo from 3 years ago referencing another employee who had left abruptly after disputes regarding project ownership. The name wasn't familiar, but the pattern was. Eric had been doing this for years, quietly absorbing others' work and walking away with their recognition. I stared at the screen, a strange mix of fear and excitement swirling inside me. Someone out there knew the truth. Someone had been watching, waiting, just like me. The anonymity of it was unsettling, but I couldn't ignore the opportunity. I replied cautiously, asking who they were and what they knew. For a moment, I regretted pressing send. But deep down, I knew this could be the turning point. As I gathered my things and shut off the light, I looked back at my chair one last time. The leather gleamed faintly, under the exit sign. A symbol, a promise, a seat I'd reclaim in full. The hum of the servers filled the empty room like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the dark, truth was waking up, and I was ready to face it. The anonymous email haunted me all weekend. I couldn't shake the thought that someone out there not only knew what Eric had done, but also cared enough to reach out. On Monday morning, before the office filled with chatter and footsteps, I logged in early and checked my inbox again. Another message had arrived overnight. This time, it had a name attached. Daniel Hart. The moment I saw it, a rush of memory hit me. Daniel had been my mentor when I first joined the company 30 years ago, a kind, patient man with a dry sense of humor and an unmatched talent for systems architecture. He had retired 5 years earlier after a quiet dispute with management that no one ever talked about. To me, he had been more than a coworker. He was the reason I'd stayed so long. His message was short, direct, and familiar in tone. Claudia, I saw the award announcement. I know how he got there. Let's finish what I couldn't. Below it was his phone number. My heart thudded. I hesitated for nearly an hour before finally dialing. When his voice came through, it was older, raspier, but still steady. Claudia, he said. I wondered how long it would take before someone noticed. He explained that before retiring, he had maintained backup admin access to the company's legacy servers systems that management never fully transitioned to newer security protocols. He still monitored certain files now and then, partly out of habit, partly out of curiosity. Over the years, he'd seen the same pattern. Employees' drafts quietly absorbed into other projects, names disappearing from credit lines, and the same individual benefiting every time. Eric's name had surfaced repeatedly. Listening to Daniel, I realized this wasn't just my personal grievance. It was a thread in a much larger tapestry of corporate deceit. I want to help you, he said. Not just to get even, but to make it visible. If we expose him at the right moment, he won't just lose the award, he'll lose the illusion he built. We spoke for over an hour, mapping out the architecture of the company's data systems, tracing pathways from shared drives to presentation servers. Daniel promised to create a mirrored trail, a backup version of Eric's upcoming award presentation that would automatically reference the original source files. It would be invisible until the moment it went live. Every slide, every dataset Eric used would reveal my name as the original author, embedded deep in the metadata. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. It wasn't hacking, it was truth layered in code. When I told Naomi about Daniel, her eyes widened. "That's brilliant," she whispered. "It's like setting a trap that triggers itself." We spent the next week quietly, coordinating with him. Naomi prepared data logs and timestamps. Daniel modified server permissions from his remote access point, and I handled the documentation that would validate it all. Each evening, after everyone left, we tested fragments of the plan on old projects to make sure the process worked. And it did flawlessly. Meanwhile, Eric was basking in his newfound stardom. He'd started holding informal meetings, inviting executives to get a sneak peek of his upcoming presentation for the award showcase. He loved an audience. Whenever he saw me, he'd flash a polite, condescending smile and say things like, "Still keeping busy with your reports, Claudia? You've always been so reliable." His words didn't sting anymore. They only confirmed how blind he was to what was coming. I let him gloat. Let him believe the game was his. That was part of the performance. The company began preparing for a major event, a live showcase of innovations from top departments, a week before the industry awards. It was the perfect stage. Naomi suggested we use it as the reveal. "If his files trace back to you during that presentation," she said, "everyone will see it. There'll be no denying who the real creator is." I agreed. But we had to be careful. We couldn't make it look deliberate. The exposure had to seem like an accident of truth. So we rehearsed our parts. Naomi would handle the live systems check as the assigned technician. Daniel would remotely monitor the data relay, ensuring that the moment Eric launched his slides, the original metadata embedded in each file would surface. As for me, I would simply be there watching, silent, prepared to act surprised. In the evenings leading up to the showcase, I practiced my expression in front of the bathroom mirror. Calm confusion, mild curiosity, feigned innocence. It felt absurd at first, but the more I rehearsed, the steadier I became. I realized that revenge, when guided by purpose, wasn't about fury. It was about poise. I wasn't planning to destroy him, I was planning to let the truth do the work. The night before the showcase, Daniel called one last time. "The trail is set," he said. "Once he connects his presentation to the server, it'll activate automatically. Just make sure you're in the room." His voice softened. "Claudia, I never got the chance to fight them when it happened to me. Make sure you do." I thanked him, a lump forming in my throat. He had been silenced once, and now he was giving me the tools to speak without words. The next morning, I walked into the building earlier than usual. The air buzzed with anticipation. The showcase was a big deal, and every department was on display. Banners with the company logo hung from the ceiling, and the main conference hall had been transformed into a sleek presentation arena with a large screen and stage lighting. I took my usual seat near the back, the same spot where I'd once watched Eric steal my work. Naomi passed by, pretending to check cables, but I caught the quick, reassuring glance she gave me. Daniel's confirmation text came minutes later. "System armed." Eric spotted me before the event began. He strolled over, exuding confidence, his voice dripping with performative charm. "Glad you could make it," he said. "I figured you'd want to see how far our project has come." Our project. He had the nerve to say that out loud. I smiled faintly and replied, "Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world." He chuckled, taking my calm for defeat. "You know, Claudia, sometimes it's not about who starts the race, it's about who finishes it with flair." His words hung in the air, smug and hollow. I tilted my head, pretending to consider them. "You're absolutely right," I said softly. "Let's hope the finish line is as clear as you think." When he walked away, I took a deep breath and let the moment settle. My heart pounded. Not with fear, but with a strange sense of peace. The plan was in motion, All I had to do was sit and wait. The lights dimmed, and the CEO walked onto the stage to open the event. Her voice carried through the hall, warm but commanding. Today, we celebrate innovation, teamwork, and leadership, the values that make Linton and Chase thrive. She smiled at the audience, then continued. And now, our highlight presentation led by one of our finest minds, recently nominated for the Regional Innovators Honor. My pulse quickened as the spotlight swept across the room and landed on Eric. He stood, waving modestly as applause filled the space. Then the CEO's next words cut through the noise like a spark catching dry leaves. And we're honored to have the original project contributor joining us today as well, Claudia Dalton. Claudia, please stay for the full demonstration. I believe you'll find it enlightening. The room seemed to freeze for a second. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. Naomi turned to me, her expression unreadable. Daniel's final message flashed across my phone screen. This is it. And just like that, the curtain was about to rise on the truth. The night of the annual gala arrived like a storm I'd been watching roll in for months. The city skyline glittered outside the glass windows of the event hall, and the faint hum of conversation filled the space with false warmth. Everyone was dressed in their finest polished shoes, sequined gowns, the smell of expensive perfume mingling with nervous ambition. For most, it was a night of celebration. For me, it was the night everything would shift. I arrived early, clutching my small silver clutch like armor. The seating chart had been carefully arranged, and my name was printed neatly on a card near the very back of the room. I couldn't help but smirk when I saw where they'd placed me so far from the stage that I could barely see the podium without leaning forward. It was fitting, really. They had spent years pushing me to the background, and tonight they had unknowingly given me the perfect vantage point to watch it all unravel. Eric was the star of the evening. He moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, pretending humility while soaking in every compliment. His suit was impeccable, his confidence blinding. Cameras followed him as he posed near the company banner, and every flash felt like another nail in the coffin of his illusion. I sat quietly, smiling when people glanced my way, sipping sparkling water as if I were nothing more than a polite spectator. Inside, my heart pounded with a steady rhythm of purpose. When the lights dimmed, the stage glowed blue, and the CEO walked to the microphone. Her speech was rehearsed and full of corporate pride words like innovation, excellence, and leadership echoed off the high ceiling. I barely heard them. My eyes stayed fixed on Eric, who stood near the side of the stage, waiting for his moment to shine. Naomi caught my gaze from across the room and gave the slightest nod. Then, she mouthed 2 words. Everything's set. A quiet thrill ran through me. Daniel was somewhere miles away, watching from his home office, his system connected to ours through the mirrored server we'd built together. He had texted me earlier that afternoon. Once the demo starts, the trail will light up. I could almost hear his calm voice in my mind. All those years of being overlooked had taught me patience, and tonight that patience was my greatest weapon. As the CEO began introducing the highlight of the evening, the big screen behind her came alive with the title of the project, Project Elevate. The words felt like an echo from another lifetime. Eric walked to the podium with a smooth, confident stride, taking the microphone with practiced grace. The applause was deafening. "Thank you," he said, smiling as if humbled. "This project represents the future of analytics for our clients. It's been an incredible journey, and I couldn't be prouder of what we've achieved." He began his presentation, clicking through slides filled with my data, my visuals, my structure. The room was captivated, the audience nodding, the executives exchanging impressed glances. I sat perfectly still, watching the screen as though it were a window into my own past. My pulse quickened as I saw Naomi moving quietly near the control station, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was syncing Daniel's trigger. The data transfer was in progress. Halfway through the presentation, I noticed something shift. It started small, just a flicker on one of the slides. Then, beneath a graph, a faint name appeared in gray font, created by C. Dalton. My breath caught, though I didn't move. The audience didn't notice yet, but the system had begun unraveling the story. On the next slide, it appeared again, this time in the metadata preview that briefly flashed before the image loaded. Original author, Claudia Dalton. I saw Naomi glance at me, her lips pressing into a tight smile. Daniel's message popped up on my phone under the table. Trigger live. Watch closely. The murmurs began soon after. A few people leaned toward their screens, whispering to each other. Eric hesitated mid-sentence, glancing back at the display as if he'd seen something strange. He recovered quickly, continuing his speech, but another flicker appeared, this time larger, undeniable. The embedded data trail was surfacing automatically. Line after line of system metadata began to scroll briefly at the bottom of the screen before fading away. Each one carried my name. Whispers spread across the room like sparks on dry grass. A few audience members turned to look at me, confusion written on their faces. The CEO furrowed her brow, whispering something to the tech coordinator. Eric's voice faltered slightly, then steadied again, but his usual charisma was cracking. A small technical glitch, he said, laughing nervously. We'll get that fixed. He turned toward Naomi, who only shrugged with innocent confusion. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip, forcing myself to remain calm. The cool liquid steadied me as I watched him unravel. My hands didn't shake. My breathing was measured. For once, I didn't have to speak or defend myself. The truth was speaking for me. Then came the slide that ended his act completely. A detailed process map appeared, one I had built months before he joined the team. Embedded across the top, in clean, unmistakable font, were the words, Original System Model authored by C. Dalton, Senior Data Architect. The room went utterly silent. The CEO leaned forward, squinting at the screen, then slowly turned to Eric. Eric, she said carefully into the microphone, can you explain why Miss Dalton's name is appearing on your files? A wave of tension swept through the audience. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, but I stayed motionless. Eric's face drained of color. He stammered, I'm not sure. It must be a mistake. Maybe old template files or... His words tripped over themselves. He was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Naomi adjusted something on her console, and more data rolled onto the screen, revision histories, timestamps, user IDs. Every one of them pointed back to me as the original author. The murmurs turned into audible gasps. The CEO exchanged glances with the executive seated nearby, confusion giving way to suspicion. Eric's smile flickered out entirely. He fumbled for words, his tone rising slightly. This isn't what it looks like, he said. Claudia helped with some groundwork, but he stopped when the final slide appeared. A complete file history of the project, showing the exact moment he had accessed my original drafts. I leaned back in my chair, setting my glass down gently. The faint reflection of the stage lights shimmered across the water's surface. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The CEO cleared her throat, her professional tone struggling to mask discomfort. It seems, she said slowly, that there's some confusion about authorship. Claudia, would you mind joining us on stage to clarify? My heart steadied as I stood, smoothing the fabric of my navy blue dress. I could feel the tension in the air, the collective anticipation. I walked toward the stage, each step echoing softly against the polished floor. Eric stepped back, his hands trembling slightly, his confident mask collapsing. As I climbed the stairs, the spotlight caught me fully for the first time in years. I wasn't the woman who'd been overlooked anymore. I was the woman who had built everything they were now applauding. I turned toward the audience, then toward him. The moment had finally come. As I stepped onto the stage, the soft rustle of the audience's confusion filled the air, ecstatic before a storm. The lights were brighter than I'd imagined, hot and unflinching, exposing every detail, every expression. I kept my pace steady, my shoulders straight, my face a mask of calm bewilderment. I could feel every eye in the room following me as I reached the podium beside Eric. For a fleeting moment, I looked up at the screen behind us, my name still flickering faintly beneath the title slide, refusing to disappear. Eric's confident posture had evaporated. His face glistened under the stage lights, a sheen of sweat forming along his temples. The easy grin he'd worn moments ago was gone, replaced by a tight, forced smile that twitched at the corners. The CEO turned toward him, her expression strained. "Eric," she said slowly, her voice measured but sharp, "would you like to explain what's happening here? Why does Claudia's name appear on every one of your project files?" He laughed, that awkward, nervous kind of laugh that only makes silence heavier. "It's just a glitch," he said quickly. "Some old references must have been left in the system. Claudia helped with early drafts, that's all. These things happen." His words floated weakly through the air, but no one seemed convinced. The audience murmured, and I could feel the tension ripple like an undercurrent. The CEO didn't look away. "A glitch?" she repeated. "Because the metadata doesn't lie, Eric. It shows full authorship, not mere contribution." I turned slightly toward her, schooling my features into mild confusion. "I'm not sure what to say," I said softly, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound sincere. "I was surprised to see my name there too. I didn't think any of my old drafts were still in circulation. It was an act, of course, but a necessary one. I wanted him to speak first, to dig deeper, to bury himself in his own arrogance." Eric's jaw tightened. "Come on, Claudia," he said, his tone turning sharp. "You know how this looks. You've been accessing old company files, probably trying to insert your name into my work. That's what this is, sabotage." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and desperate. I let a flicker of hurt cross my face, then lowered my gaze. "You're saying I stole your project?" "Yes," he said quickly, sensing an opening. "You've been here for decades, and you've never handled projects at this scale. You've been bitter ever since my promotion. You had access to the system, and clearly you used it." A few gasps rippled through the audience. I looked up again, eyes calm now, voice steady. "If that's what you believe, then maybe we should let the facts speak for themselves." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small flash drive. Naomi had helped me prepare it earlier that week, every timestamp, every draft, every email archived neatly. I handed it to the CEO. "These are the original records," I said. "I thought I should keep them just in case the company ever needed them again." The CEO nodded to the technician near the console, who inserted the drive into the computer connected to the big screen. Within seconds, a series of folders appeared. Initial drafts. Created, the 14th of August, 2022. Author, C. Dalton. The same date, weeks before Eric had even joined the project. The room went utterly silent. The CEO turned to him. "Eric, care to explain this?" His composure cracked completely. "She's faking this," he snapped, his voice rising. "These could have been modified. Anyone could change timestamps." Naomi stepped forward from the tech area, holding a printed copy of the system logs. "Actually, ma'am," she said carefully, addressing the CEO, "these logs match the company's internal server history exactly. I verified them myself this morning." She glanced briefly at me, her tone steady. "There's no sign of tampering." Eric's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. The crowd began to whisper again, the sound swelling like a low wave. I could see faces in the audience, confusion, curiosity, and then dawning realization. They were piecing it together. The woman in the back row, the one who had been overlooked for years, had built the very thing this man had taken credit for. He tried one last attempt, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is all a misunderstanding. Claudia and I worked together. It was a joint effort. Maybe there was miscommunication." The CEO raised a hand, silencing him. Her eyes had hardened now, the pleasant corporate polish fading into something colder. "Enough," she said. "The evidence is clear. Claudia, it seems you've been rather patient through all of this. Would you like to address the room?" My heart slowed to an almost serene rhythm. I took a step toward the microphone, my heels clicking softly on the stage floor. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, the kind that forces everyone to lean in, to listen. "Thank you," I said finally. My voice was calm, not triumphant, but steady, the kind of voice that comes from years of restraint. I've been with this company for 34 years, I began. I've seen teams rise and fall, projects succeed and fail. And through all of it, I believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and gave your best, the truth would always find its way forward. Maybe that was naive. Maybe I was just old-fashioned. I paused, glancing briefly at Eric, whose eyes darted away. But I've learned that truth doesn't need permission to exist, it just needs to be seen. The audience was completely silent now, I continued, my tone still composed. This project, the one we're discussing, was something I poured months of my life into. I didn't seek recognition. I only wanted to see it succeed. But when credit was taken, I realized it wasn't just my work that had been stolen. It was the principle behind it. And principles, I said quietly, matter. I looked around the room, meeting eyes that had once dismissed me. I don't stand here out of bitterness or revenge. I stand here because silence allows theft to flourish, and I won't be silent anymore. For a moment the hall was still. Even the air seemed to pause. Then, somewhere in the audience, someone began clapping. Slowly at first, hesitant, as if testing the mood. Then another joined in. And another. The sound built, growing fuller, louder, until the entire room was applauding not politely, but earnestly. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, and it washed over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I didn't smile right away. I just stood there, letting it sink in. Across from me, Eric looked like a shadow of himself, pale, hollow-eyed, his confidence crumbling under the weight of exposure. He glanced toward the CEO, but she was already turning away, shaking her head. The applause continued, a rhythmic, undeniable acknowledgement of what had just unfolded. I finally exhaled. A quiet, steady breath. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was clarity. After so many years of being invisible, I had become undeniable. As the clapping began to fade, the CEO spoke into the microphone again, her tone measured. "Thank you, Claudia," she said. "That was enlightening." Her eyes flicked toward Eric. "We'll be reviewing this matter immediately." I nodded slightly and stepped back from the podium. My pulse calm, my mind clear. The truth was out. And for the first time in a long while, the applause wasn't for the wrong man. The Monday after the gala felt strangely quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. When I stepped through the glass doors of Linton and Chase, the usual buzz of conversation was replaced by a low, uneasy hush. People looked up from their desks as I passed, some nodding awkwardly, some pretending to be busy. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the damage is being quietly assessed. The storm, in this case, had been a revelation that no one could ignore. Eric's office door was closed, but the blinds were drawn halfway, offering a glimpse of emptiness inside. His nameplate was still on the wall, but the chair sat vacant, turned slightly away from the desk, as though he'd left mid-thought. I heard later that morning that he'd been suspended pending a full internal investigation. The official email from Human Resources came shortly after, sterile in tone, the kind that tries to sound neutral while everyone already knows the truth. Effective immediately, Eric Martin will be on leave during an ongoing review of recent project discrepancies. I didn't smile when I read it. I just sat at my desk, fingers resting on the keyboard, letting the words settle like dust. For years I had dreamed of this kind of vindication, but I had imagined it would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt, still, like balance restored, not revenge achieved. By mid-morning, people began stopping by my cubicle. Some came with soft voices and tentative smiles, offering apologies disguised as small talk. "You know, Claudia, we always knew you were talented. It's such a shame what happened. You didn't deserve that. We're all so proud of how you handled yourself." Their tone carried a mix of guilt and self-preservation. The same colleagues who had once avoided me were suddenly eager to stand beside me, as though my vindication could wash away their silence. I nodded politely, thanked them. But inside, I felt detached. I wasn't angry anymore, just quietly observant. Watching them squirm in their newfound admiration almost felt redundant. People move with the current of convenience, and the tide had simply shifted. Around noon, I received a calendar invite from Karen, my manager. The same woman who had once told me to mentor, not compete. Her message was short: private meeting 1:30 p.m. I half expected a formal reprimand or a careful corporate apology. When I walked into her office, she greeted me with a tight smile. "Claudia," she began, her tone rehearsed but cautious, "I wanted to personally say that the company appreciates your professionalism throughout this unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate," I repeated softly, taking a seat. "That's one word for it." She shifted in her chair. "The executive team was very impressed by how you handled yourself at the gala. The way you presented the facts calmly, it reflected well on all of us." All of us. I almost laughed at that. "I'm glad it reflected well," I said instead. Karen folded her hands. "There's been a lot of discussion about leadership realignment within the department. Until further notice, we'll need someone to take over Eric's responsibilities. You've been here longer than anyone, and frankly, you've earned the respect of the team. The directors would like to offer you the interim role of senior strategist." I blinked slowly, letting the words sink in. His position. His chair. The very title that had been handed to him after he stole my work. For a second, I almost felt a flicker of irony, but I steadied myself. "Interim?" I asked. "For now," she said, "though I think we both know it'll become permanent soon." I nodded once, firm and composed. "Then I'll accept." After the meeting, I returned to my desk, but I didn't sit down right away. My gaze drifted to his office again, the empty chair, the desk still cluttered with files and notes. By late afternoon, HR sent out another notice. "Please welcome Claudia Dalton as interim senior strategist, effective immediately." The message was met with quiet applause around the office, though it sounded half-hearted, uncertain. I didn't need their cheers. The silence was enough. Later that day, Naomi appeared at my door, a broad smile lighting up her young face. "Congratulations," she said, holding a cup of coffee like a peace offering. I knew they'd realize it eventually. "Eventually," I repeated, accepting the cup. "You were the only one who believed me from the start." She shrugged, but I could see the pride in her eyes. It wasn't hard to believe when the truth was that obvious. We both laughed softly. Then she hesitated. "Oh, and HR asked me to come by their office earlier. They're offering me a full-time position. Junior data analyst?" My smile widened. "You deserve it, Naomi. You've earned it more than anyone." She blushed, glancing down at her shoes. "I think you had something to do with that." "Maybe," I said lightly. "Maybe not. Sometimes good work just finds its way into the right hands." After she left, I sat in silence for a long while, letting the hum of the office surround me. My computer screen glowed softly in front of me, the cursor, blinking like a heartbeat. I thought about Daniel, the ghost in the system who had given me the tools to fight back. I hadn't heard from him since the gala. But that afternoon, an email popped into my inbox. Subject: Justice served. Claudia. I watched the recording they posted internally. "You did exactly what needed to be done. You didn't shout. You didn't break anything. You let the truth speak for itself, and that's what makes it so powerful. Congratulations, old friend. I finally got to see one of us win." "Daniel." I smiled, my chest tightening with gratitude. I typed a short reply. "Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you." Then I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment settle. When the office began to empty for the evening, I finally stood and walked toward Eric's old office. The lights were off, but the door was unlocked. I stepped inside quietly. His desk was cleaner now, the personal photos gone, but a faint trace of his cologne lingered in the air. I walked around to the other side and looked at the chair, the one I'd always seen from across the table. I hesitated, then slowly lowered myself into it. The leather was cool beneath my palms, the armrests sturdy. From this angle, the office looked different, familiar yet foreign. For years, I'd believed that taking his chair would mean victory. But sitting there now, I realized something else. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about humiliation or pride. It was about justice, quiet, earned, inevitable justice. The kind that doesn't demand noise or approval. It just exists, finally balanced. I looked around the room once more and smiled faintly. Then, as I reached to turn off the desk lamp, something caught my eye. A flash drive, small and black, half hidden under a folder in the drawer. My pulse quickened. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. There was no label, no marking, just the faint imprint of fingerprints on its surface. I plugged it into the computer, curiosity overcoming caution. A single folder appeared on the screen, titled simply, Backup. Inside were dozens of files, emails, project outlines, and a document labeled Future Plans. As I opened it, my eyes widened. It was a detailed proposal not just for my project, but for several others. Each one followed the same pattern. Names of employees whose work he'd planned to claim next. Strategies for how to present them as his own. I leaned back slowly, the realization washing over me. He hadn't just taken from me, he'd built a career on taking from others. This flash drive was his legacy of theft, his roadmap of deceit. I exhaled, closing the folder. Justice, it seemed, wasn't quite finished yet. The following week carried a sense of stillness I hadn't felt in years. It was the calm that comes after long storms, a quiet, weightless kind of peace. My office, once a corner cubicle tucked out of sight, had now become the glass-walled room that used to belong to Eric. His nameplate had been removed, replaced with mine. The morning sun poured through the wide windows, warming the desk that once held his ambitions. It was strange, sitting there, surrounded by the ghosts of his arrogance. Every click of my keyboard felt like reclaiming space he had once stolen. But peace rarely comes without resistance. I should have known he wouldn't vanish quietly. On Wednesday afternoon, as I reviewed project forecasts, an email from HR appeared in my inbox marked urgent. It contained a series of forwarded messages, a chain supposedly between me and a client, implying I had falsified data during the project's testing phase. The tone was professional but damning, with timestamps that made it seem authentic. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my chest tightening not with panic, but with understanding. This was his final move. Eric might have been suspended, but he wasn't finished playing games. The emails had his fingerprints all over them, the same phrasing, the same subtle manipulation he'd used for years. He wanted to leave a mark, even as he fell. A last, desperate attempt to stain my credibility before the company finalized his termination. But what he hadn't realized was that I had been waiting for this. Weeks earlier, when I'd uncovered the flash drive in his desk, I had found everything drafts of fake correspondences, notes to himself detailing potential insurance plans if things went wrong. I had archived all of it and sent a secure copy to Daniel, my quiet guardian from afar. He had stored it safely, time-stamped and encrypted, in case anything ever resurfaced. So when HR requested a meeting later that day, I walked in not afraid, but prepared. Karen was there, along with two senior HR officers. Their faces were polite but tense. "Claudia," Karen began, "some concerns have been raised about correspondence with one of our clients. We received these emails earlier today." She slid a printed copy toward me. "We'd like your clarification." I took the papers, scanning them slowly. My voice was even when I spoke. "These are falsified," I said. "The metadata will prove it." One of the HR officers frowned. "You're certain?" I nodded, sliding a small flash drive across the table. "This contains the original communication logs and internal message archives, verified by timestamps and server records. It also includes a list of similar manipulations performed by the same employee who sent those." Karen's eyes widened slightly. "You have proof?" "Yes," I said simply. "I've had it for a while." They exchanged glances. One of them plugged the drive into a laptop and began scrolling through the folders. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the truth stared back at them. The forged email chains, the original unedited correspondence, even Eric's personal notes planning this exact sabotage attempt. It was all there, neatly organized, a mirror of his deceit. The HR officer looked up, his tone shifting from suspicion to respect. "This is thorough. Thank you, Claudia. This will help us finalize our decision." "Decision?" I asked, though I already knew. Karen folded her hands, a rare hint of discomfort in her voice. "Eric violated multiple company policies, including data tampering and falsification of records. HR will be issuing his termination today." There it was, the last domino falling. I nodded, quiet, composed. "I understand." By the time I returned to my office, the whispers had already begun. News traveled fast in our building. The same people who had once celebrated his rise were now murmuring about his fall. Around 3 in the afternoon, I caught sight of him through the glass doors downstairs. He was escorted by a security officer, his ID badge clipped to his jacket for the last time. His usually immaculate hair was unkempt, his suit slightly rumpled. He didn't look defiant anymore. He looked lost. I stood by my window, watching as he crossed the lobby. He didn't glance upward toward the floor where I stood, though I knew he felt the weight of it. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing in the space between who he thought he was and what he'd become. When he reached the exit, the sunlight hit him squarely in the face, blinding, unforgiving, and for a moment, I saw the same expression I'd worn months ago when he first stole my spotlight. Only now, the roles had reversed. He paused near the revolving door, and though I couldn't hear him, I could read the small motion of his lips, maybe a sigh, maybe a curse, maybe just the acknowledgement of defeat. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd outside. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting lightly on the glass. I thought I'd feel victorious, maybe even vindicated. Instead, what I felt was a quiet kind of peace. The cycle had ended not with shouting, not with revenge, but with truth, doing what truth does best, standing unshaken. When I finally sat down at his now my desk, I noticed something I hadn't before. The chair was still slightly adjusted to his height, higher than mine. I lowered it just a bit, aligning it with my comfort, and in that small motion, I felt the symbolism of the moment settle around me. This wasn't about taking his place. It was about reclaiming the space I had always deserved. Late that afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight touched the office walls, my computer chimed with a new email. The subject line read, "Invitation to Keynote, Regional Innovators Conference." I opened it carefully. The message was formal and concise. "Miss Dalton, in light of recent events and your exemplary contributions to industry innovation, we would be honored to have you deliver the keynote address at this year's conference." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The very event that had once been meant to honor him was now extending an invitation to me. Life, it seemed, had a way of restoring symmetry. I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face, not of arrogance, but of relief. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the buildings surround me. Justice had come full circle. I wasn't just surviving the story anymore, I was writing its ending. Outside my window, the city pulsed with light and movement, indifferent to the quiet victories unfolding behind office glass. Somewhere down below, people hurried home, unaware that one woman on the 15th floor had just won a war without lifting a single weapon, only patience, evidence, and grace. I opened my eyes again and looked at the invitation one more time. The conference was in 2 weeks. I would stand on that stage soon, the same kind of stage where he had once stolen my work, and I would speak about ethics, innovation, and resilience. But this time, the applause wouldn't be misplaced. This time, it would belong exactly where it should. The day of the conference dawned with the same crisp chill that had once greeted me on the morning of the gala. But this time, I wasn't walking in as the forgotten woman sitting at the back of the room. I was walking in as the keynote speaker, the name printed boldly on the program, the person they had all come to hear. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same industry that had once looked past me now sought my voice. It was poetic, but more than that. It was justice unfolding in silence. The auditorium was grand, far larger than our company's event hall. The stage was bathed in soft white light, the kind that made everything seem sharper, more real. I arrived early, my notes neatly tucked inside a leather folder, though I knew I wouldn't need them. I had lived this story long enough to know every word by heart. A coordinator approached me with a smile, offering water, checking the mic, levels, rehearsing introductions. Everything was mechanical, routine until I glanced out at the rows of seats beginning to fill and saw him, Eric. He sat near the middle, not in a suit this time, but in a simple jacket. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. I almost wondered if I was imagining him, but no, it was unmistakably him. The same man who had once stood on stage basking in applause now sat among the crowd, anonymous, stripped of the power that had once shielded him. Word had spread about his termination. His reputation had collapsed quietly but completely. And yet, here he was, perhaps to save face. Perhaps to prove to himself that he wasn't entirely erased. For a moment, old memories stirred the humiliation, the stolen credit, the countless nights spent rebuilding what he had taken. But I refused to let those emotions resurface. This moment wasn't about him. It was about me reclaiming what had always been mine. I straightened my blazer, adjusted my mic, and took a slow, grounding breath. When the announcer called my name, "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Miss Claudia Dalton," the applause was immediate and genuine. The room echoed with it. I walked onto the stage, my heels steady against the wooden floor, the lights warm against my skin. The same kind of light that had once blinded me at the gala now felt like an embrace. I began without looking at my notes. Good morning, everyone. 34 years ago, I walked into my first corporate office, believing that good work always spoke for itself. I believed that effort, integrity, and quiet persistence were enough. But what I learned, I paused, scanning the audience, is that silence can sometimes make it easier for others to steal your voice. The room fell into attentive stillness. I could see people leaning forward, eyes fixed on me, waiting. We live in a world that often confuses confidence for competence, I continued, where appearances can outweigh authenticity, and sometimes those who speak the loudest are heard first. But there is something that never fades: truth. It might take time, it might get buried, but it never disappears. I spoke of resilience without bitterness, of loss without self-pity. I told them about the importance of documentation, mentorship, and the courage to speak up even when it's uncomfortable. I never mentioned Eric by name, I didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew enough of the story to fill in the blanks. Instead, I focused on what mattered. The lesson. Integrity, I said, isn't about winning. It's about knowing you did the right thing even when no one was watching. And eventually, when the dust settles, it's the only thing that still stands. As I spoke, my eyes briefly found his again. He wasn't smirking this time. He wasn't fidgeting or whispering. He was listening. His expression was unreadable, maybe regret, maybe disbelief, maybe something else, entirely. I didn't need to know. What mattered was that I was the one on stage now, and he was the one in the audience. The roles had reversed completely, beautifully. When I reached the end of my speech, I slowed, letting my final words linger in the air. For years, I believed my worth depended on who noticed my work. Now I understand that my worth was never theirs to measure. It was mine to define. The truth doesn't need applause, but when it comes, it sounds sweeter than you could ever imagine. A hush followed that electric silence before a storm breaks. Then, slowly, applause began. It swelled, growing louder, until it filled the room completely. The sound wrapped around me like a long-awaited embrace. Faces I didn't know were smiling, standing, clapping. Cameras flashed, hands came together, the room pulsed with warmth and acknowledgement. And then, among the faces in the crowd, I saw him. Eric was clapping. At first, it was tentative, a small, almost reluctant gesture. But then it became steady, rhythmic, indistinguishable from the rest. His eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable but sincere enough to make the moment surreal. The man who had once stolen my applause now had no choice but to give it back. He was applauding me not out of pride, not out of kindness, but because he had to. Because the truth left him no other choice. I didn't smile, not right away. I let the moment breathe, the noise filling the space between who I used to be and who I had become. Then, quietly, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile, not one of triumph, but of closure. I nodded slightly in his direction, a silent acknowledgement that the story had finally come full circle. After the event, people surrounded me with congratulations, business cards, and requests for collaboration. I accepted each with gratitude but also with quiet restraint. This wasn't about networking or fame, it was about resolution. I excused myself after a while, and found a quiet corner near the side of the stage. The lights had dimmed, and the crowd was dispersing. I looked out over the emptying room, feeling the echoes of applause fading into silence. Outside the venue, the sky had begun to shift, the soft gold of late afternoon spilling across the horizon. I walked to a nearby bench, sitting down with my notes still in hand. The air was cool, filled with the distant sounds of traffic and city life. I thought about all the years that had led to this moment, the struggles, the dismissals, the quiet nights spent doubting myself. And then I thought of Naomi, of Daniel, of every small act of faith that had carried me here. When I finally returned to my office the next morning, I paused at my doorway. The same chair sat waiting for me, polished, solid, my name now engraved on the small brass plate at the edge of the desk. I sat down slowly, the leather creaking softly beneath me. It didn't feel like his chair anymore. It felt like mine earned, rightfully and completely mine. I leaned back, the skyline reflected faintly in the glass, and allowed myself one final thought. The quiet line that had lived in my mind since this all began. The sentence that carried me through betrayal, humiliation, and truth. This time, he had to watch me shine. When I look back now, I don't see a stolen career. I see a lesson in patience, strength, and quiet justice. I didn't have to destroy him, I just had to let the truth breathe. In the end, the applause I'd been denied found its way back to me. And as he stood there, clapping with everyone else, I finally understood success isn't about being seen first. It's about being remembered last. So, if this story made you believe that truth always finds its way, maybe someone out there needs to hear it too. Share it. Let it reach the ones who've been silenced, and remind them that patience can be its own kind of power. And tell me this. For years of your hard work and applause, would you expose them or wait for the world to see the truth on its own?